But in my normal 300 level, I have two problem sets running simultaneously, and they're different problem sets. So the groups are answering their own questions and coming to consensus answers. I then shuffle the groups so that they paired up with someone who was from a different group. And in the second part of the tutorial, they have to verbally give the answer to the question, but the person giving the answer to the question is not the one who worked on that problem set. They will have been discussing the answer to that problem set with someone who worked out the consensus answer with their home group. So there's peer-to-peer learning, both when the groups coalesce in the beginning of the tutorial to come to consensus answers. And then I shuffle them, where they do peer-to-peer learning with someone who hasn't worked with that problem set, but then is obligated to verbally give the answer as I call on them for those questions. Meanwhile, they'll have already given me their written answers, which I mark on a very generous scale, just because I'm looking for that gestalt. But they can then turn in the answers to their tutorial questions after they've refined them through this process. So depending on the class, I may have also that next step of refinement, which I usually do mainly at the 200 levels, because at 300 level, the students, they seem to be able to use just the interactive sessions to full benefit. Making them then resubmit it didn't give me any more benefit, as far as I could tell, at 300, but at 200 it does. I have material, and it's packaged in Learn on a regular basis, what's going to be taught. And that material will be supported by readings and also movies that I've done, that I've produced, that is an audio-visual experience that goes with that reading material. So they have that as a package. What I do with when they can nominate additional discussion, monologue discussion, that is an extension of the material that we're already covering, but for which they've run into special problems or they have a special interest. But one of my goals is to get them to understand how the techniques contributed to that version of events, so that they understand how to use the experimental techniques behind their science, and they're familiar both with how they're applied, but also the limitations of those techniques. And the textbooks generally aren't quite as good at that, and the students aren't quite as interested in exploring a technique for its limitations as I might want them to be. So in this last year, for example, when I started to challenge them about their answers to questions, how did somebody come to know that to be the answer? I found that they probably weren't spending as much time as I would like on understanding the methods behind the experiments. So that was one of the topics they nominated then for one of these 1-hour vignettes. And I did a summary of different kinds of experimental techniques, not to answer the question, not to say, and here's all the limitations of that technique and all the techniques you'll ever need to know, but as an example for how the student could then go back in their own time, look at the techniques and say, okay, based on the example, I know that there are different ways in which I can question how this technique is used and where it might have blind spots.